There's a word in Japanese which describes the situation where humans disappear inexplicably, removed from this earth without anyone noticing. Kamikakushi. Kami means deity. Kakushi means the act of hiding or hidden away. In the old days, people believed that when someone disappeared without a trace, the gods that lived in the mountains, forest or waters took them. Sometimes they returned just as inexplicably as they'd gone, unharmed. Other times, they were found dead somewhere. Most of the time though, they simply disappear forever. Studio Ghibli lovingly adopted this concept into a classic animated family movie, but the actual history behind the phenomenon is possibly far more sinister. I want to share with you a narrative from my grandpa, who'd spent his younger years living in a village in rural Japan. He had been in a hospice for his last couple of years, and it was during one of those last visits I paid him that he shared this experience with me. I'm posting this half hoping that anyone out there who has heard of or been through a similar experience will find this and find me. It was something that had bothered my grandpa in his last days, and I truly wish I could find an explanation on his behalf. I don't know exactly when it happened. He wasn't able to recall dates clearly, but Grandma later told me it was way before she'd met him. My best guess from this and Grandpa's story is that it probably happened around the late 1950s. It was one of those small types of villages that are amongst a cluster of villages, where they all kind of blend into each other, and no one knew exactly how many distinct villages there were. Only people who lived there could tell them apart. They worshipped gods there, but they weren't any of the common Shinto gods I was familiar with, nor were they anything from the Hyaki, Yagyo, and Maki. I think it had to do with the time period back then. People would invite statues of pagan gods into their homes for blessing, out of less than religious reasons, which were usually a blend of deities from different cultures. He said that when he was young, a lot of young men were leaving home to find work or better education in Tokyo and other big cities. The economy was flourishing. People started looking forward to a busy urban life, and everyone was always talking about big changes coming this way. Then, on an otherwise completely unremarkable day, a boy from one of the neighbouring villages went missing. He remembered when the news spread to his village, and it was after dusk. He was, at the time, deeply disturbed by the timing. It meant that the boy went missing when the sun was going down. They called that time of day Omagataki, the time of meeting demons. Sundown was a weird time for some people because they believed that's when the doors to the underworld would open and humans would be able to see the otherwise invisible creatures that roamed at night. The missing boy's mom found some abandoned toys in a field where a vast forest lay just beyond the grass, so they assumed he'd wandered too far and got lost in the trees. A lot of people went looking for him, all night and then the next day. But they never found the boy. The older kids in my grandpa's village were all saying it was Kamikakushi, that he was taken from the field because he somehow made the forest gods angry. His dad came back from Kyoto. My grandpa wasn't sure if it was Kyoto. About a week later, and organised a search party, but everyone knew by then that it was too late. What happened next got really weird, and I'm not sure if my grandpa even remembered things correctly, but according to him, a couple of days after the dad came back, that entire family vanished from their home. People searched the house, the surrounding areas, and even went into the forest. But they were gone. And they left everything behind. There was leftover food on the stove, clothes laid out on the mats. Some chicken feed was left out in the yard, as if they got up in the middle of their chores and walked away from their life. Most of the village suspected that the dad took his family back to the cities overnight because they didn't want to keep looking for their son anymore. But between the village kids, everything about the disappearance made a creepy legend. The old people at the time, among some of the more superstitious type, prayed by roadside shrines to their gods and asked them to protect the children. The third time it happened to an older girl, a couple of years older than my grandpa, who was getting ready to be married. Her family kind of freaked out and got these exorcists, not sure what they were, to come, who performed some type of elaborate ritual to try and locate the girl. It's a bit unclear what happened there, but people got spooked and stopped letting their kids play outside, saying that it was an animal attack. It was a pretty big deal for a while, and they looked for signs of large animals coming out of the mountain. But he didn't remember if they'd found anything. The only thing he remembered was that the disappearances never stopped. At some point, they just gave up looking for the missing people. It was a weird time back then, because a lot of families were leaving the villages anyways, and they'd always say that so-and-so moved to a big city. They had such and such relatives there who's running some type of small business and the whole family left to join them. Or, remember that kid from so-and-so's home? They sent him to a school in the city. Most people believed that no one ever went missing. They just simply moved away. It seemed odd that a lot of them left in the middle of the night without taking anything with them, just like the first family did. But people were under some sort of influence of rapidly changing era, and no one really thought too much about it. The girl who was supposed to get married? My grandpa heard her family eventually left too, but he wasn't sure if they actually moved or disappeared. These incidents kept happening in random villages, so people didn't always hear about them, but everyone personally knew at least one or two families that seemingly left all their things behind and vanished overnight. For my grandpa, it was his neighbours. He'd been friends with the neighbour's kid since they were little boys. The day before it happened, they were playing outside, not far from home, since they both had to be indoors before sundown. As the sky turned orange and the sun a blood-red hue, my grandpa thought it was time to go home. He told me that this was when he saw a humanoid thing appear on the horizon. It kind of hovered on the gravel road, or it was walking, but because the setting sun was blinding and dyed everything a vague, warm colour, he couldn't tell. He knew it wasn't just a person walking by, because the thing had more than one pair of arms, and they all hung down the sides as it sort of moved across the road and gradually dissipated into the orange air next to the fence outside his friend's house. He didn't fully understand the significance of that moment at the time, so he acted normal and told his friend he was going home. They agreed to go fishing at a nearby creek the next day. Come morning time, my grandpa came out to find his parents in their neighbour's home, and they told him that the neighbours had vanished. His friend, their parents, their siblings, everyone was gone. He remembered hearing his dad say it was weird for them to leave without saying anything, because the two families had been close friends. His mother, my great-grandma, became very upset and said that she was going to pray to the shrine they had at home and offer some food to the gods. Later that year, my grandpa's family moved to Tokyo, where he met my grandma, and they eventually relocated to the US. It wasn't until he was older that my grandpa realized what he saw that day and why people in his hometown kept disappearing. He told me that it was because the culturally ambiguous deities they worshipped got used to the offerings and didn't want people to leave the village. The deities they worshipped were not proper gods and had no restraints to act benevolent. Kamikakushi was a way for them to keep the humans there, so their incense would never burn out and their offerings never depleted. The cluster of villages are long gone now, replaced by quaint small towns, new developments where people who stayed there lived a peaceful, rustic life. No one knows what happened to the ones who left back in the days. My grandpa had considered reaching out to someone back home and asking them about the vanished families. He never did. I don't know if he's afraid of what he'll find out, or afraid to hear that those people had vanished too.